Welcome to For Every Response, the podcast from Emergency Services Times, sponsored by MSA Safety. In this series, we bring you sessions from the Emergency Services Show and the Emergency Tech Show 2025. David Davis is the Chief Clinical Information Officer for the London Ambulance Service. He is at the forefront of trying out a branch of artificial intelligence that is all about voice. Find out in this episode how Ambient Voice Technology could be the key to saving time on paperwork so that paramedics can spend more time with patients.
I'm really curious about this because I've never been a paramedic, but of course I've seen them doing their jobs, often in stressful, difficult circumstances. And a lot of what they're doing is dealing with a person and then turning to write something down. Right. How is this changing?
Well, I'm pretty sure I've seen you floating around near emergency calls in London, but yeah, maybe that's his alter ego. So what does this mean? I just wanted, what I was trying to do earlier when we started was capture the voice of the clinicians. And I guess I should say that I am a clinician and I used this technology only yesterday in a clinical shift in London. And what people are telling us is this is allowing them to spend more time looking and talking to patients in the way they used to before they found themselves leaning over a tablet and having to tap away.
And how does it work in practice then?
So the way we are doing this pilot with Tortoise is that we use a web-based application. There are two settings that we use it, both within our clinical hub, so in our emergency operations centre, in our 999 control centre. I know this is an emergency tech show, but I just want to make sure everyone understands. We have a large number of clinicians who are generally senior paramedics and some nurses who will look at those emergency calls and try and identify which of them potentially need upgrading to get a swifter response, but also work with patients to identify alternative options than an ambulance response to give them the best outcome. So the way we use it in practice there is the ambient scribe is turned on at the beginning of a call. When we first piloted it, we didn't do consent. Sorry, we did consent patients to it, but we took some legal advice. We worked really carefully with the guidance and found that with a transparency statement on our website and by virtue of the fact that the emergency 999 setting, all calls are recorded anyway, we turn it on and it listens to the call. So what's different? And I'd love you to hear my colleague saying, he's saying, I'm a one-finger typer and I struggle to type and talk. What I end up doing is writing some paper notes. What happens now is our clinicians can make some notes if they want. They can use an interface to put notes in which sit alongside the spoken word, but they can actually just have an interaction like we're trying to without looking at our colleagues out there. And what they tell us is that that allows them to maintain the kind of flow of the conversation. They don't lose their thread because they're trying to sit away to make notes. And at the end of the conversation, they click a button to generate the note. Sitting alongside that is a transcript of the call, which is kept momentarily. And then it's, with the click of a button, they get to choose either a note to pass into the clinically aided dispatch record system, or a note that we've designed using a template to send to clinicians who are at the scene, potentially with a patient or en route to a patient. And that creates that summary note. The next bit, which is really important, because this isn't about replacing clinicians, it's about supporting clinicians. And also, it's not perfect. What they do is read the note, validate it, amend it in context, and then when they finish, they can click copy and pass it across to the computer-aided dispatch record.
Is LAS...
That all makes sense.
That does make perfect sense.
Hope it makes sense.
Is LAS the only place doing this?
Oh, I'd love to say yes. Not because we want to be first, but because if there is anywhere else doing it, I don't know about it, and then I'll feel like a fool. I think the answer is yes, but what I can tell you is we're working with colleagues, some of whom are sat in this audience today, in other ambulance services to extend the pilot there as well. But as far as we're aware, both within the clinical hub context and in the face-to-face ambulance, which we haven't talked about, the face-to-face ambulance practice, we think we're probably the first to test this, and certainly the first to test Tortoise AI.
I do want to come on to the working with other services, the face-to-face element, but take us back a step. What prompted this? What made a manager in London Ambulance Service go, we can save some time there, or we can save some money there, or this is something we should be doing.
Yeah, you make a good point. Serendipity is what made it happen. A couple of things happened. Great Ormond Street Hospital teamed up with Tortoise AI, and they applied for frontline digitisation funding, which, as you may remember, was a few years ago a pot of money that people could apply for to accelerate their digital progress. And they set up a programme of work with the NHS London team to test Tortoise AI in a number of clinical settings, primary care, emergency departments. And in their phase 4 pilot, they wanted to do it within the ambulance service. They thought they would be able to do it pretty much focused on face-to-face, whereas we were like, I think this could work for the telephone-based setting as well.
So talk us through the face-to-face then, and the kind of patient experience and the paramedic experience.
Yeah, look, perhaps before I do that, I would imagine getting a presentation from a bunch of enthusiastic doctors, a CCIO colleague, and the guys from Tortoise AI in one of the offices in London Ambulance headquarters. And we were presented with this thing, and it looked really good, right? And they were saying, look, we think we can give you microphones, and they'll be able to work in the face-to-face setting. And we were a bit, is it okay to say that ambulance people can be cynical? So we said, hey, why don't you, Dom's chief exec there, we said, why don't you come out and do a ride out? So and keep in mind, I was still pretty nervous. I was like a month or so into being in London. The paramedic bit's okay. The London stuff was a bit nerve-wracking. But anyway, I went out with one of my team members, also a paramedic, and we took Dom out for a clinical shift, coming up to a year ago now. And the thing that surprised him, so he's a cardiologist by background, and he's worked in the secondary care setting and in EDs as well. But the thing that really took him by surprise was that ambulance clinical practice isn't like the sterile environment of a hospital. And it's not that they didn't anticipate it, but what they didn't expect were the rows between the receptionist and the GP, the row between the patient and their family member. I mean, you know how it is. The row between my colleague and me about when time we were going to finish. No, yeah, or Jake. But this huge context, hoisting a patient, taking a patient to the bathroom, collecting their belongings, extended episodes that could take an hour and a half. It's not like a focused 10-minute consultation in a secondary care setting. And of course, then you've got the very busy backgrounds. It could be a busy emergency department, a busy street setting, a busy house with lots of people chatting and panicked voices. So that was the bit that was, is this going to work? And he was like, I'm not sure. And we sat outside the back of a hospital whilst waiting to hand over. I don't know whether any other ambulance colleagues experienced that. I say that tongue-in-cheek because I read the national statistics. But we sat outside and thought, look, let's look at our electronic record, the key bits that we record, and see whether we could create a template using their no-code template creation. And then what we did is faked through dictation a post-event kind of case, and we thought, it does quite work. Now, initially we were thinking, you know what, maybe post-event dictation was the way forward as opposed to ambient listening. So that was the premise that we set up. We created a template for the face-to-face, and fast forward a few months, we invited a bunch of clinicians, both from our clinical hub setting and our ambulance operations face-to-face setting, and said, everyone can apply. You can come and be part of the kind of first pilot wave of test users. We had a workshop. Sat around using it on the iPads. All of our clinicians have personal issued, trust-owned iPads. And does it work? How's it going to work? We took the template that we created through governance and we rolled it out. And guess what? We found that you could use ambient voice because indeed some clinical settings do lend themselves to an ambient voice. Our critical care colleagues who spend their life charging around doing resuscitations and all sorts of horrible stuff like that, they find that post-event dictation is powerful. It's slightly different between the clinical hub and the face-to-face settings, but I don't want to keep talking. You might want to ask a question or...
Well, no, I'm curious at the quality of the dictation.
Right.
Because, as you're suggesting, a critical care or senior paramedic sitting in their fast response car after a call, if they've been able to pick up a coffee as well, even better, or an ambulance crew waiting to get into the A&E knowing they're going to be 15 minutes, that's one thing. But you touched on this earlier, being in someone's home or outside a pub or at the side of a wet, noisy road accident, that's a different kettle of fish.
Yeah, and guess what? It doesn't work in all settings. So you learn and live by experience. And only yesterday I had too many people talking, and the note that it created included a line of nonsense. I knew what it was saying because I was there too. So it was like my wing person, if you like, and I was able to adjust it to make it make sense. But it also captured some stuff that I'd forgotten as well. So why do I forget stuff? I have this image in my head that in my 20s I can remember every word spoken. And it was pretty close. But these days, actually, you learn that you're not, well, what's the word, infallible. And it's really great to have someone listening someone listen to me talking about AI as if it's a person, but something listening and able to kind of cross-verify what you've heard and what you haven't heard, because you're focused on something, distracted by a colleague waving to you saying, just go now, or passing you the keys. You miss that stuff. So it's like having a bit of backup in that space.
And that's good and that's fine. But the thing is, if dictation or ambient listening makes a mistake whilst you're dictating your shopping list, then you come home with beans instead of peas. But if you're talking about someone's medical condition, that can be really dangerous. What are the kind of guardrails in place there?
Yeah, I wondered when we were going to mention guardrails. Well, look, the principal guardrail is the clinician.
Right.
And without wishing to disparage anyone, and I can only criticize myself, having looked at my own clinical records over the years, guess what? I don't write it down right all the time. And there's an acceptable level of tolerance for humans. But the bit that has to be within as close to perfection as possible is the key information, that key clinical information, the key diagnosis aspects, the key treatment stuff. And I would say that in the very main part, clinicians are very good at that. I look at a lot of records and I know that they're good at that. But I do know that some of the written words are spelt wrong, the wrong words in the wrong place. And we also know that clinicians are looking for ways to help them be reliable and create robust notes, and people have a pro forma or a template that they use. This just takes it to the next level. So the guardrail is the clinician. But hey, guess what? We're not replacing the clinician. So actually the clinician is still central to this, and of course the patient.
And how does it work then? You touched on this earlier, when you're working with other trusts, whether it's other ambulance services, other organizations, a local authority, because one of your patients has social care issues. Is there data sharing? How do you work with that?
Well, I mean, speaking from a London perspective, the AI scribe stuff is the only bit that would be relevant to that question. Perhaps would be the fact that we've created a disclaimer is the wrong word, but every time we cut and paste the scribe created notes, it says this clinical note was created with the support of a digital tool. But the contents has been checked and validated by the responsible clinician, and underneath it writes your name. So the responsibility still focuses back. So we're transparent. We're transparent whether it's another agency, social care, for example, or indeed the coroner. We're transparent around how we've created the record. On our website, in our transparency statement around the use of AI, we're clear about it as well. In terms of how we share data in London, we all have access to the London Care Record, which is the shared care record for London. We publish our records directly to the London Care Record, and anyone that has access to that when they're delivering care to a patient can access both our records in the same way that we can access their records. We don't have full integration with social care, only in one of the areas of London, should just say.
So you're a paramedic, you're working on ambulance with a colleague.
Yeah.
You get dispatched to an immediate call. How does it work in practice then? Do you have to press a button to switch the thing on? Does it automatically activate when you press the 999 button on the blue lights?
Yeah, no. So it's the choice to use the ambient tool is that of the clinician. It sits side by side with the entry into the clinical record. So typically, we would turn up to an incident, take our iPad with us, and then once we've started the interaction with the patient at an apposite moment, we would ask them for consent. So if they've got mental capacity or it's appropriate to do so, we'll ask consent, not just of the patient, but any family members, carers or professionals. And we let people know. I have to say, I've never had anyone in my experience say no. Most people are like, well, of course you would. Why wouldn't you? Everyone else is using this technology. You then open up via a web clip that we've deployed onto the home screens of our tablets, and that opens up the Tortoise web interface. Now, one of the things that we did early on is recognize that login burden is a real problem. So what we did is link it direct to our Active Directory, and we have SIS2 deployed into our iPads as well. And you can either log in through your NHS Net account or through the Active Directory account, both of which are live within there. So we mean when you're in your already logged in and secure environment, we don't make them log in again.
Right. Okay. So once a paramedic starts their shift and they begin that login process already, they're not turning up to a call and having to decide between doing CPR and logging into the iPad.
And the truth is, if you're doing a clinical skill or an intervention, you're not going to be putting ambient voice technology to delay the care.
Yeah.
But what you will do is at the appropriate time choose to either consultation, which is listening, ambient listening, or post-event dictation. And just as I did yesterday, I supplemented part of my clinical interaction, particularly in the history-taking part around the events leading up to the incident. I was able to use the ambient scribe for that, and that was very helpful.
Mm-hmm. What kind of challenges or pushback do you find from your frontline colleagues?
We were at a meeting the other day. We invited some colleagues from, I think it was East of England ambulance, so forgive me if it wasn't. And we invited one of our clinical managers from the clinical hub to come and talk about it. And the question was, how's it gone down with the colleagues? And she said, I think almost verbatim, this is the easiest piece of technology I've ever had to try and implement in the clinical hub. Rather than having to force people to do it and coerce them with an arm behind their back, people are begging us to turn it on and begging us not to turn it off. And pretty much universally, people love it. I've had a few conversations with colleagues where they've given me with a wry smile and a look in their eye saying, oh, you're just trying to make us work harder, aren't you? And it would be disingenuous to say that around the executive team table, we're not really conscious of the financial pressures that we're facing. And everyone knows that we've got some difficult societal choices to make around how we spend our public money. And we know that the investment that we had up until at the end of last year isn't available this year. So I think people appreciate that. But our focus is not on productivity, although that's a big headline. People say you've got 15% increase in productivity without integration. That's amazing. And that's what the early part of the pilot showed us. But more importantly, we hear one of our neurodiverse colleagues saying, and I'm neurodiverse as well, and I find it hugely advantageous, saying you've made my life so much easier. My spelling isn't a curse to me anymore. My distraction isn't a curse to me. You've supported me with that. So when they then say, but you're just trying to make me work harder, the answer is, well, look, if your life's better, you're doing better patient care, we're getting better clinical outcomes, we're able to get people ambulances quicker, and whilst none of us as clinicians like to focus on times, if you're having a heart attack or a stroke, you want a quick ambulance and a quick transport to hospital or definitive treatment. Actually, if we're making your life better, giving you less stress, and then you get to spend more time with patients, that's a win-win. If that means you're seeing more patients, well, of course, there's an advantage there because we're in this challenging time. So I think it's about transparency, but we're clinically driven on this, not operationally driven. You will hear me talk a lot about, in the kind of private conversations we have around productivity. And the reason that's so important is we have to pay for this stuff. And critically, we need to pay for my colleagues who, help implement it. And we need to be able to justify the money that we're spending on implementing it.
How much money are you spending on it?
And absolutely not that much, bizarrely. We've done some kind of... So we're in the middle of writing a business case at the moment, and we'll share it with colleagues. But we think it'll probably cost between £1.50 and £2 an hour to deploy. And that's, a consultation. But that's based on a whole range of averages. And that's with all the on-costs. But ask me in a month's time when we've done the business case.
Yeah.
But even if it were £5, if you think the nominal cost of a double crew ambulance response is £80 an hour, and that can be, sometimes 2 hours, you're still talking about, fractions thereof.
Yeah. I'm curious about the software and how it works. Is it sitting on the iPad? Will it work?
Actually, I need to correct myself. This is why I'm not an accountant like my parents. The cost I've quoted is per hour. Actually, the consultation cost was between 35 and 65p per consultation.
Okay.
So not a huge cost. It's a big difference.
Yeah.
Had to correct myself.
Yeah. Does the software sit on the iPad? Will it work if you don't have signal reception, network's down, network's busy, Notting Hill Carnival? Or is it like your phone, and if you're trying to dictate into it and it can't get a good signal, it struggles.
So it will cache some data locally, but it does require an internet connection, and
Right.
it may come as a huge surprise, but we have dead spots in London, don't we?
Yeah.
Unbelievably. You can get a mobile phone signal in Western Australia, but not in Croydon, it turns out. So there is a reliance on that, and we have had some problems. For example, Apple protect people's data by turning off cameras and microphones in applications when they're not being used. So if you put the iPad down on the side and it's left for a while, it'll turn the microphone off.
Right.
So these are the things that we're working through, both in partnership with Apple, Tortoise, and the tech guys that we have in our team to try and fix. And we're getting there.
An ambulance is just one part of the patient journey, arguably, one of the most stressful, one of the most urgent, one of the most challenging. But then you pass this patient onto a hospital.
Yeah.
What's the reception been from clinical staff in A&E and wards when they're seeing this ambiently scribed notes?
I have to remember I'm in public. So A, in the main part, they have no idea that we're using it. B, the reception really does depend on how busy they are. But we're doing a range of things in London to try and help from a technology perspective. We've just put in place, or we're putting in place, electronic transfer of care, where we're flowing demographic information directly into electronic record systems of the hospitals, and some clinical information we're piloting in a couple of locations. So I think people are expectant and understanding that we're using the technology. And keep in mind that this pilot study also piloted the use of Tortoise AI and Ambient Voice Technology in a number of emergency departments. So people are less surprised, but there is, we're still at the front edge of that adoption curve for all clinical settings.
You say it's still a pilot study.
Mm-hmm.
What's the end date?
So we plan to run this study up until the end of the financial year. And our next plans are we focused on the clinical hub setting because it was, I say, the easiest to implement. That would be an over-exaggeration, but it was the quickest to implement and the most controlled to implement. And we're working with 2 other Southern Ambulance Service collaborative organisations to extend that pilot. So we're going to use those data to create a business case. And once we've done the crunching of the business case, then we'll go to procurement.
This episode of the Emergency Services Times podcast is sponsored by MSA Safety, proudly supporting emergency services and first responders on the front line. At MSA Safety, protecting first responders isn't just what we do, it's who we are. We work closely with fire and rescue services across the UK to develop and deliver safety solutions designed to meet your ever-evolving needs. That includes MSA Bristol Firefighter PPE, trusted by services across the UK and beyond, shaped through years of collaboration with frontline teams. It also includes our growing investment in innovation and technology, from the connected M1 SCBA modular solution to our agile, fully managed service model that helps keep crews protected and ready to respond. But for us, safety goes beyond equipment. We believe in standing shoulder to shoulder with the people who dedicate their lives to protecting others, whether it's supporting firefighter charities, backing mental health initiatives, or showing up for community events. MSA is proud to be part of the Emergency Services family. To learn more about our work in the UK and how we're supporting first responders every step of the way, visit www.msasafety.com. With MSA Safety, when you go in, we go in with you.
At the end of the financial year, when the pilot's wrapped up, what does success look like for you?
It's a good question. Of course, as part of our planning for this, we've identified the metrics that we want to measure, and those are things like job cycle time, patients per shift, patients per hour, productivity, handover to green times. This is all, unless you work in the ambulance sector, you've no idea what I'm talking about. But essentially, these are the kind of temporal measurements of productivity. But we've also been working with Great Ormond Street's drive unit to do a qualitative evaluation, working with our staff. So how comfortable and confident they are is critically important. We're also looking at things like their overall cognitive burden and cognitive load effects. And if we can lessen them, because if you can take the pressure off of clinicians, it makes their day better, their clinical decisions better, and helps them go home feeling well. They're the things that I think are success. I mean, you can tell I'm lent towards that. I haven't talked a lot about patients here, but critical to this is timely access to information and being able to provide really consistent clinical notes. So a couple of things. First of all, my colleague whose video, these fabled videos now, he was going to say, hey, one of the things that I can do now is I can get a summary of my clinical consultation over to the ambulance crew before they arrive on scene. And I may have got information that they won't get again because I was talking to someone who wasn't there, or, context changed. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, this is just the beginning. And one of the things that Dom, I think he would say if he was out on the stage with us, would tell you is he was gobsmacked by the handover experience in hospital. And they were very nice to us before you jump to any conclusions. But the bit that he was astonished by was that you'd have this very rich clinical encounter, which starts with a 999 call triage, perhaps has a clinical hub assessment, and then has a 2-to-1 ratio on average of clinicians to patients, robust, holistic clinical assessment and social care assessment. And that's distilled into a 9-word sentence or a couple to the triage nurse, whose job is to work out where to put them, how to prioritize them, where they're going to be, and doing with another handover. And when we reflected on it together, we were like, you know what? Each of the people that receive our clinical information need a different view. We can't, as the clinicians, create those multiple views. We do it orally. But actually, if we could use large language models and AI, try not to use that acronym as often as possible, to turn our records into the right type of presentation for each of the clinical settings, given that the triage nurse needs one thing, the clerking doctor needs another, the secondary care specialist doctor needs, or clinical team, the rehab specialist need another. They all want different things. If you could press a button and create the version of the record to do that, that's got to be next ambition. We need to make it easy for clinicians to do their job.
We had on the stage someone last year who was using AI in 999 calls in an ambulance control room and doing fascinating things with their triaging calls. So yeah, definitely lots of scope there. Are there any situations where you don't use it? You say this is pediatric call, this is neurological, this is a social care, switch it off, we don't need it. Or we're not allowed to use it?
No, but that's not quite true. If someone refused to consent, we wouldn't use it.
Yeah.
We don't give them that option over the telephone because we don't consent anyone to either their location details, which we get unmasked, or to recording 999 calls. So that's the right decision in that setting. The other time that we wouldn't use it if the clinician doesn't think it's the right thing to do.
But why might they not think?
Well, because it might be that it's such a sensitive situation that it just needs a human contact, or that it's a very sensitive safeguarding issue or something like that. But that's to the discretion of the clinician, and very much up to them. The other place that we don't currently use it is for our non-clinical settings. So the front end of the 999 and 111 system has non-clinical staff typically taking calls. We do not use it there. However, we are going over the next few months to run a pilot to see whether we can create a scribed summary of the 999 and 111 calls that could be used to support the clinicians working in the clinical navigators, in the clinical hubs, the integrated urgent care clinical assessment service, to help them with the structured sieving and sorting of cases, and also whether that would add value to the ambulance clinician. So we're going to do that on the bench. We can do that using call recordings with the right governance in place, and we're using a multidisciplinary team to assess that. We're also thinking in the future about how we can support our frontline staff. Just think about cardiac arrest, something I know you know about as a heroic volunteer responder, just to blaze you in glory. We know that the best cardiac arrest survival comes from identifying people's location and their condition early. Probably, I can say one of our biggest struggles is identification of agonal breathing, which is that breathing that you have when you sometimes have when you have cardiac arrest. So we're going to see whether we can develop the technology to do that. And I'm not talking necessarily about Tortoise or AVT, but can we cross-refer the mobile phone coordinates to the machine quicker than the human can enter it? If we can, and it's got good reliability, and they're not breathing, well, then we should do our Category 1 dispatch at that point, because that's going to give the best chance of survival. So these are some of the exciting things that we're thinking about. And we're also thinking about how we can team the way we bring all this information together and present it alongside historical records and shared care records for individuals, so that when we're trying to make wise clinical decisions for the people waiting in our emergency ambulance dispatch queues, which is a feature of every ambulance service in the UK and probably wider, we can use summarized information to help make those decisions, because you can't bring 400 pages of information into a small snapshot as a human in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned shared care, because generally speaking, unless someone's going to their GP, if someone's interacting with the NHS, it's because they've called 999 or 111. But there are a few outliers. Maternity wards are a great example, where a pregnant woman will be given a specific number to call the maternity ward in these circumstances. Again, those are situations where it's a person taking the notes. There's scope for things being missed, not caught, written down incorrectly. Have you had interest from hospital and NHS trusts with a view to implementing this in those kinds of scenarios?
In all honesty, we've talked about it, but I wouldn't say that they would necessarily come to us, because we kept a relatively low profile until today. Relatively, there was a couple of social media posts because we wanted to test it first. There's no point in claiming amazing things are happening before, but we're certainly keen to talk to colleagues. I think there's a number of other settings which are interesting, perhaps to the wider emergency spaces. Can we deploy ambient voice technology in major incident, in multi-agency place, whether it's the gold meetings or the kind of tactical space where you have commanders together dealing with large scale incidents? Or is it just that windscreen and methane report? I really do feel like I'm now talking in acronyms. Our comms team would tell me off. But anyway, the point is, we've been very much focused on the clinical stuff, but as an emergency service, we can't forget that we do emergency stuff that requires multi-agency response. And at the moment, those of us who work on call and provide response, we have bits of paper or we use a OneNote to make our notes and provide timestamps. There clearly has to be merit in an ambient scribe technology in supporting that, and certainly something that we're going to look at.
Where is this going next? What's next on the schedule?
Well, I mean, for us, the short-term focus is on a business case for our clinical hub space. Our medium term is getting a full understanding of its relevance and applicability in ambulance operations. We've got it rolled out to a few stations, and if it doesn't have a negative effect either on patient experience, clinician experience, or on the operational aspects, because we can't, then we'll extend that pilot and then measure that and see where it takes us. In terms of extending the fringe of it, we're going to do some on the bench testing of 999 call summary, 111 call summary, and to do some other stuff. We're working with both Tortoise and some other companies and experts and academics on that. So almost certainly this technology is in one way, shape or form here to potentially stay. And I think the way that we create our records will forever change once we have the ability to consume data, for example, from GP Connect, so patients, medicine and medical history. We can bring that in, check it, validate it, put it into the record, then send it on to the onward care provider. We then have to think that it's not just about typing, it's consuming information from our monitor systems, it's consuming pictures, videos, scans, ECGs, and then you've got multiple input methods, which could be ambient voice technology done passively in the future. So these are all things to think about. So the future is going to be different, and how we have to respond as an industry is making sure we're transparent, we're safe, we're thinking about our clinicians and patients at the front of it, and that we also work with our suppliers, many of whom are in this show today, to get them to work together. We need good data and content integration. We need people not to be creating proprietary systems that won't talk to each other.
That integration is always really difficult with technology systems that talk to each other or don't, or this one's got that safety net on that one's not compatible with. How do you work around that challenge with your suppliers?
How do we work around that challenge with the suppliers? Yeah, you can probably tell in my voice, it's not always easy. It's not always easy because, and I entirely respect suppliers' positions, people can feel anything from anxious to annoyed by things changing. And the reason for that is they employ people. Without them employing people and developing their products, we don't get to buy them. We are codependent. We have to have a good relationship. So our approach has been to be transparent and open, check where the boundaries are, ensure that we understand and appreciate each other's needs and that we're respectful of it. We can't just be a reckless big customer. I was listening only today about, tariffs and how, the Land Rover, Jaguar Land Rover cyber attack is affecting the small suppliers, in Middle England who do one injection molded part. They don't have the stability and ability to wear their stuff. We have a social responsibility to our suppliers, but equally they have a responsibility to be able to work with us, develop APIs, make sure that they can do the integration and plan to do so.
Yeah. I'm curious, does anyone have any questions they would like to put towards David?
David, really interested, and I'm interested in the accuracy at first pass, really. Having just gone through a transcription of a meeting that a number of us were on only a few weeks ago, and the amount of time it took me to clarify and clean that up, right? And certainly somebody with a twang like me, mine was horrendous, right? How does it cope with dialects, for example? And
I realise I kind of didn't talk about that and don't often talk about it. And having listened to Radio 4 Today programme too often, I don't want to be a politician in my answer. The answer is it really does depend on the setting. I mean, in the first instance, talking about the diversity thing that you're talking about, London's hugely diverse. We have lots of diverse workforce, but we also have lots and lots of diversity, both in terms of our population and the people that visit London. And the answer is pretty good. If you have a quieter setting, and certainly on the telephone, where you've got crystal clear audio going, digitally into the system, it works very, very well. And the first pass accuracy is good. What's even better is that the guys at Tortoise have worked really hard to make sure that their large language model is trained by clinicians and a clinical reference group. And we're working with them to deal with ambulance abbreviations. The number of TLAs and FLAs and SLAs that we've got in the ambulance sector, like every industry, is huge. And so we're looking to improve the accuracy by building the model to understand the words that we use every day. I would say that I can't even quantify it. And we are doing some analysis on that, although we don't store any of the data, we don't store the transcription. So the analysis only gives us an insight into the amount of change that's done from presentation of the data to the second half. But I would suggest, in my experience at least, it's probably 95, 98% accurate. But in a busy, noisy environment, or where I'm talking rubbish, or people are talking over each other, less good, right? Just like a human.
Getting back to consent, it sounds like you need to have both the patient and the clinician consent. Is there a point where you see that becoming the default for either of those parties?
That's really interesting. It is interesting. I mean, for example, we use a number of shared care record systems in London, and without getting into the idiosyncrasies, one of the national shared record systems, there's no consent required because an assumption that it's there to deliver care. And if you've matched a patient to the spine and you have their NHS number, you don't have to have consent to do it. I think it comes down to the ethics of good practice. The emergency 999 call setting, the reason that we've got a privacy statement on our website and we're open and transparent and update that every time we use new technology is because we can't afford to take away time to consent someone in the emergency setting because the focus has to be on saving life. It's the same as you call 999 to the police, or when you dial 999 and speak to the BT operator, they don't consent you to recording and they don't tell you it's going to be used for training purposes. A bit like some insurance companies might be using ambient voice technology without your consent to check to see whether you're a fraudster or how much they think they can get away with charging you. I'm not saying that happens. I'm just saying the technology apparently is possible. So for us, transparency is really important. So where we can't do it face-to-face and we can't consent people face-to-face, then we'll make sure it's available on all of our outward-facing communications. In terms of the interaction with patients, it is, you can make teaching you to suck eggs, best interest decisions under British law, which means that sometimes it won't be necessary or possible to consent someone to any of the things that you're doing. Looking up their record, they might be unconscious or under the influence of drugs or alcohol, and you have to make a best interest decision, and that would include looking at records. But in the main part, because contrary to how it looks with Josh and Penny, or are they still on? casualty, I don't know. Anyway, contrary to how it looks like on all the TV coverage, the majority of our patients are people who you can have a consenting conversation, and we would consent them to all aspects of their care, whether that's treatment, taking a blood pressure, or looking at their records. As I said before, in the very main part, our patients expect us to be communicating about their medical history. They expect us to see their clinical information, and they expect us to be using technology to enable it. After all, we don't consent people to use a defibrillator or the ECG systems that we're using, and I think we have to see this as an emerging technology in that way.
You mentioned the fact that clinician-patient relationships much improved, or potentially improved because there's more of a focus like we're doing now. Have you got any feedback from the patient?
No, we haven't. Save as for the individual interaction feedback. I mean, certainly in my experience, I know other clinicians have done the same. I mean, guess what? We also treat healthcare professionals from time to time because our patients are us. and I've certainly had conversations with both lay and professional patients, if that makes sense. And they've said, oh, hey, what are you using? And you show it to them and they're like, oh, okay, that's really cool. Yeah, it works, makes sense. And you show them how you've used it. So in that sense, it's very positive. What we know that, the feedback from the clinicians is the ability to maintain focus on a conversation without having to look down and type. And that's particularly relevant for the telephone-based context, but it's also relevant for that, that side-by-side consultation, the bedside conversation that you have, whether you can just maintain the continuity of the conversation.
Do we, as the clinicians, have to capture the data in a certain format to go into the software, or does it auto-format it into primary survey, secondary survey, and everything else, and then the care plan at the end?
Yeah, great question. I mean, one of the questions we should ask ourselves as clinicians is, are we all using our electronic record systems in the way they were designed? And the answer is, it's complete chaos out there based on my experience. What we know is the medical model of clerking is generally the one that people are taught at university, and it's the one that most people understand. It's the common language that we use. But what we've done in London Ambulance is created our own template. So the Tortoise product, and I'm sure other products do the same, allows you with no code to create a template and to create an example or exemplify a model of a clerking. So you can create your own headings and tell the model what to look for in those. So, we system-based survey, you would choose your major systems and it will only surface them in the note if you've actually touched on them. But we can also say, for example, consent, always write something about consent, even if it's to say that there was no listened to conversation about consent. So you can choose which to always surface, which to include when they're spoken about. But one of the things that we've found is it's driving consistency. So for the electronic patient care record clinical note, we used a medical model of clerking similar, but we use a SOAP or an SBAR type approach for the clinical hub setting because it lends itself to a more condensed and summarized record.
Just one final one for me. When you decided to roll this out, was it easy to deploy it to all the iPads that you needed? Or was it like, take your kit back to base, plug it in, give it to IT, we'll get it back to you tomorrow?
Well, look, for the face-to-face stuff, it was easy because we deployed a web clip and that automatically opened. So we did that through our mobile device management. And when we integrated with our Active Directory so that your London Ambulance Service login and your iPad login linked together, seamless. What was more of a headache, and a couple of my colleagues, including Sarah here and Anna back at the rancher and some of our telephone engineers, we had a heck of a job getting both sides of a phone call to come out of a computer which sits behind a firewall that doesn't have access to the internet, to go back out of the computer and out of the headset, and for both sides to be listened to. Right. We ended up buying some kit. We bought some boxes because we hadn't done the integration, we hadn't done the digital integration. We're now working with our telephony provider, network provider, so via WaveNet and Tortoise, developing the APIs to do the full technical integration alongside the integration with our computer-aided dispatch provider and our electronic patient record provider, Cleric. But it was a headache to deploy in the clinical hub setting. But remember, we've only got no more than 100 desks. Our average working is 28 to 40, 24 clinicians working 24/7, which is actually quite a lot, I know. But you have a limited scope, limited geography. So the answer is it's been pretty easy, but it's not been without its headaches.
Yeah, fascinating. Well, you've got a few months left on your project. I look forward to going to my next Good Sam notification and having the paramedic walk in the room and saying, "Hey Siri, log a heart attack." But maybe it's that easy, maybe it's that not that.
Thank you.
Please join me in thanking David
Thank
from London Ambulance.
Thanks for listening. Remember that by taking time to learn from our speakers, you can earn CPD points from our partner CPDme. So do check out the link in the show notes. Our thanks to MSA Safety for their continued support for our podcast and Smart Digital for producing this series. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe to For Every Response, the podcast from Emergency Services Times.